Okay. I'd like to call this regular meeting of the Board of Education to order. There will be a special Board of Education meeting Tuesday, January 15th at 8 p.m. in the Board of Education meeting room. The next regular Board of Education meeting will be held on Tuesday, January 22nd at 7:30 p.m. in the Board of Education meeting room. In the interest of time, I will forego my chairperson's report other than to say thank you to the board and to everyone who attended and or watched our marathon session on Saturday. It certainly speaks to the dedication of the town, of the people who are willing to participate in that marathon day. So thank you very much. And with that, I will go to public comment. Seeing none, I'll move on to superintendent's report.
Nothing new.
No, see, we're moving right along. The approval of minutes. It is requested that the board approve the following minutes. First up, minutes of the special meeting and executive session held on December 11th, 2018. May I have a motion? Mrs. Ritchie. A second is Mr. Burke. All in favor? That is unanimous. Minutes of the regular meeting held on December 11th, 2018. May I have a motion? Mr. Deneen, any comments? May I have a second? Mr. Burke? All in favor? That is unanimous. Meetings of the special meeting held on January 3rd, 2019. May I have a motion? Mrs. McNamara, any discussion? Discussion? A second? Yeah. Mr. Maroney? I'm anticipating some discussion in a moment. If you'll notice, I don't usually do this. All in favor? That is unanimous. And, yeah. May I sorry, I lost it for a second. And the regular meeting minutes as amended January 5th, 2019. May I have a motion? Mr. Burke?
Oh, I never got
let's
those.
have a motion and then you can explain.
I
Mr. Burke?
I never got those.
Yeah, I got the first. Did we get a second?
Okay, can I have a motion? Then we can open discussion. Mr. Burke? Is there any discussion?
I didn't get
Yes.
an amended copy of it.
Nadine has it amended. I don't think she sent the amended.
Okay, I don't have the amended either. Okay, so,
I'm not going to amend right now.
can you, is there an amendment to make? Mrs. McNamara, you had a change?
Yes.
What was it? And Mrs. Stein will amend it and we can vote.
To the original minutes sent by Nadine, I'd like to amend the vote on the budget
Control.
The motion for
control
report on budget
material,
control.
the vote. To change Flip-Flop, Burke, and Brown, please.
Okay, so the amend is it was marked wrong. Mr. Brown and Mr. Burke's vote was reversed.
Correct.
The new minutes will correctly show that Mr. Burke voted against, Mr. Brown voted in favor, and the motion carried in favor 5-4. So with that amendment, may I have a second? Mr. Burke, all in favor?
Burke was the first.
Oh, Mr. Brown will second. All in favor? Welcome to how you gotta run a meeting. All in favor, it was unanimous,
Okay, we're done.
and we will move forward. Board committee reports. Mrs. McNamara.
I can report this morning, I did attend the CABE, Connecticut Association for Boards of Education meeting this morning, the breakfast, the legislative breakfast, which was attended by about 5 representatives from Hartford. And a couple of points came up I thought might be of interest to the board. The first one had to do with teacher pensions. We've heard about that before, according to representatives there at breakfast this morning, that issue is very much alive and kicking in Hartford, and therefore we should still be thinking about it. There isn't a lot we can do. Since the 80s, the pensions have not been funded, and so the state is now in a $2 billion deficit. Just talk to your legislators, talk to people in Hartford, because that is still alive. The second issue has to do with school construction. When that issue came up, our legislators were indicating, again, there's a $2 billion deficit in Hartford. If they're going to be doing anything, it'll probably be toward transportation issues rather than school construction. So make sure you've got good professionals if you're doing school construction, as in the squeaky wheel gets the money. The third issue came up with special education, and this is an issue we've talked about before, burden of proof. There is no political will right now to be taking that on by those representatives, but they did indicate that perhaps CABE, as a state body, with new leadership coming into Hartford, that they could get a smaller group and start approaching some of our legislators to say, this is an issue we need to have addressed, as we are one of 5 states in the country who handle this issue independently. And, the last issue that came up, which I hadn't heard about, though it's been going for a little bit, the Special Education Task Force, the insurance cooperative. There was supposed to be an update as of December 15th. This would be a scenario where municipalities would contribute into a state pool run by an independent insurance company to pay for special education costs. We have not seen an update yet on that. If so, I'm sure we'll get word back from Tara or Dr. Landon. And speaking to some of our colleagues in neighboring towns, nobody is in favor of this proposal. It seems to be really supported by those entities and the people who would serve on the board to run this insurance company. They're the ones who are interested. So it was a different formula for education funding for special education, and stay tuned.
So a couple clarifications. You said 5 legislatures attend, so I just want to be clear what these breakfasts are. They, whether it's 5 or 10 or 6, they attend and they talk about where they are. They're certainly not speaking on any particular vote that has happened. They're talking about their position on these areas and what they're seeing in Hartford.
They're talking about what they are hearing, what
Yes.
their colleagues, the committees on which they serve.
Yeah, so then we did have a bit of an update on this special education committee. It is not a governmental committee. It is a private committee that
Right.
is going out and doing this. Jill and I both attended in Norwalk, one of their focus groups. We had an update here. I think it was end of October, November. We can go back, but universally the towns, similar to what you're seeing or saying, attended, rejected that plan. So their presentation before the state continues to be pushed back on a regular basis. There is some lack of clarity with who is pushing the agenda and or pushing the group. So we've yet to see what it means. They are going out and doing these focus groups, and everybody is wondering who, what, and where is backing them, because
Right.
it remains very unclear. So thank you for attending on behalf of the board. Any other board committee reports? Okay, we'll move on to further discussion and possible action on the contemplated gift of the Darien High School cross-country running track. Dr. Landon.
Thank you, Tara. Joe Canis is with us, who's been the engineer on the project. I know Mark Maybell couldn't be here on behalf of the DAF. I had expected Peter Graham would be here, but it doesn't look like he's here. In any event, we discussed this once before. Since that time, one question came up, and that was with regard to the Diller property and the fact that it is in the middle of a wetlands. Joe can speak to this better than I did speak to Pam Gar today and said it's been completely surveyed. And there is no question that the land is acceptable for the purpose of a running track, and maybe Joe can fill us in on that.
Good evening. For the record, my name is Joseph Canis. I'm a licensed professional engineer in the state of Connecticut. I am also a principal engineer with the firm of Ty and Bond. We're retained by the Darien Athletic Foundation for the conceptual design of the proposed cross-country track. And as Dr. Landon said, we are aware that there are wetlands on the Diller property. I believe last time I spoke to the board, I pointed out this map, and I did state that this green area hatched on the map is a wetland area. Those wetlands were flagged by a professional soil scientist, and the locations were picked up in the field by a licensed land surveyor. And as you can see, we do have stretches of the proposed track that run through the wetland area. And one of my first concerns when I was brought on board with this project was the fact that there are known wetlands on the Diller property. And I had an initial discussion with the town's inland wetlands officer, Rich Jacobson, and explained to him what we were doing, the type of material that we're using for the track. And he was comfortable with what we were proposing, and he said he did not see that as a problem, so we did proceed with the concept design as you see here. And again, just to reiterate that the track surface itself is crushed stone, so that allows the water to move in through the material without really dislodging the material. Now, what you're probably seeing here is that the Diller property is exceptionally wet, especially this year. You know, I checked the weather records for Hartford at Bradley Airport. We received 68 inches of rainfall in 2018, which when you compare to a typical year is about 45, 46 inches. So it's been an unusually wet year. So what you're seeing out there is not a typical condition. And another issue, transitioning from the wetland issue for a moment, another question that we were asked last time around when I was here was regarding accessibility, if it was handicapped accessible. And I did research that. There are no formal guidelines that have been officially adopted. There are some advisory guidelines. And just to give you some highlights, is that the trailhead parking must be accessible. So what we're proposing is this last space here off Nutmeg Lane. That would be handicapped accessible with a ramp up to the sidewalk, a typical sidewalk ramp. Crushed stone is considered a firm, stable surface. And there are slope limitations where the slopes exceed 8%, and by meaning that for every 100 feet that you walk along the path, you can't exceed 8 feet in elevation change. Obviously, we don't have that here. It's a pretty flat piece of property. The minimum trail width is 3 feet. We're proposing 5 feet. So we're good there. And then tread obstacles such as roots and things like that, they are permitted. So based on those advisory guidelines, by converting this last space here to a accessible parking space, we do meet those advisory ADA guidelines. So with that, I'd like to answer any questions the board might have.
Dr. Landon?
I don't have any questions. No, I was going to proceed if there aren't
Mrs.
any.
McNamara?
Just a couple of things. In the document supplied in our package, the signage, to clarify, is that going to be prepared, presented by the DAF to the board as a gift, or it says the Board of Ed will do the signage?
The DAF agreed to supply the gates separating Diller property from our property. They will be responsible for paying for the signage once we get the appropriate language from the police department.
Okay, just the verbiage said the Board of Ed, so I wasn't clear in the
No.
memo. So I just wanted to clarify that. So that will be the Darien Athletic Foundation. Okay.
Correct.
Thank you.
Board questions? Mr. Maroney?
Can you just refresh to us where this cross-country track goes?
Sure.
So it starts down behind the football field, correct? Or
That's
maybe-
correct, right? This map here shows just the Diller portion of the property.
Right.
But if I flip it over, this is the whole high school property. And the intent is to start on the Stadium East Field because it's wide, it's lovely, you can get a lot of runners there. So it would go southward, then would run across the varsity baseball field, then along the grassed area, beyond the new wooden guide rail that was installed along the south side of the ring road. Then went into the Diller property.
Okay, can you stop there? So just before, I don't know what the road is, Norotan Avenue,
Yes.
the guardrail comes all the way around
Mhm.
onto, from the high school parking lot all the way, so how are the runners, they have to do a steeplechase?
No, we would have to modify that, right, yeah. We would have to
So
maybe
take a section out?
take a section
Or
out.
make it
Or make
movable
it
so it can
removable,
be-
right, exactly.
Okay.
So one of those two options, we haven't gotten that far with the design yet, but Then you would cross Norotan Avenue.
Joe, can I ask a favor?
Sure.
You can't see it all, can you?
I've got it here.
Okay, can you just, I can't see this whole side. Could
Oh,
you just move it to
how
your
about if I,
other
do
side?
this?
Oh, no, you don't have to hold it. You can just move the easel to
No,
the other
I
side.
can hold
Oh,
it,
you sure?
yeah.
Okay.
This is the same from last time, right?
That's the same
Okay,
exact
so I have it
thing.
from last time.
Okay, so we cross Norotan Avenue, enter the Diller property, and then there's a pipe crossing on Nutmeg, right? And so instead of crossing that water course there through the Diller property, we come onto the sidewalk, cross Nutmeg, and then run behind the parking lot, through the woods behind the practice field here. Then we run behind the tennis court. There's going to be some tree trimming because the branches are somewhat low in that area. Yes?
So is there a different route if the Diller property's underwater?
If the Diller property is underwater, what you could do is take the outside loop here. But the full competition length includes this loop, and if it's been wet, that's something they'd have to take a look at, in terms of scheduling. So behind the tennis courts, then behind the building here, there's a depression to the north of the gym, runs across there, then up that slope, behind the stadium field, and then back to the beginning. So that's the circuit.
And that whole course is approximately 1 1/3 kilometers?
That, just,
1.1?
it is 1.48
So 1.5
kilometers.
kilometers.
Yeah.
So 3 loops will be a 4.5 kilometer
Right.
course in 5. So if the average runner, if a really good runner can run 5 kilometers in 15 minutes, and some slower runners in a varsity race could be running 24 or 25, they're almost 10 minutes or 1 lap behind. So you would have runners on that entire course the entire 25 minutes.
Potentially.
So, okay, Mrs. Stein?
And I don't know.
This might not be, okay, go
Yeah,
ahead, sorry.
read. How many teams, I see the odds in the audience, how many teams compete in a cross-country meet generally? Sorry, I don't mean to put you on the stand, but 3 teams. And
So,
Can you
know
just
what,
tell-
Dave, if you're gonna answer from the
Sorry.
audience, I have to ask you
Yeah,
to
you're gonna
come
have to
up.
repeat everything.
can you just give a little overview of a cross-country meet, what this will look like at the high school? Because some of the concerns from the board are just congestion, is the track wide enough? Can you just give us a little snapshot of what a cross-country meet entails?
And/or do you feel
Or
comfortable?
if you're okay,
doing that?
sorry, I don't mean
Sure.
to put you
No,
on
no
the
problem
spot.
whatsoever.
Appreciate the
We're so enthusiastic about this, the concept of this gift, and it will so greatly enhance the experience of all the kids on the team. And from a meet perspective, in managing the experience of a meet, this will be a terrific thing. Having a 5-foot wide path is ample, more than ample, and is wider than some courses which are on a school property that utilize some woods on the school property have even more narrow sections that we run. So there are usually 3 teams involved. Usually one of the 3 teams tends to be a smaller size team. There are girls and boys races, and there's a varsity race, there's a novice race. Novice race is co-ed, and then there are varsity girls, varsity boys. So there's 3 races in total. And the races do spread out over time, so the way that the routing is set up is to accommodate the largest size crowd early in the race before people spread out, so the start has ample space for people to spread out when it's most congested, and then it quickly, halfway through the loop, it will spread out into a line. with
I'm sorry,
people
could you
strung
introduce
out.
yourself and
Oh,
your affiliation
so
with
sorry.
this project?
Yes,
Thank you.
my name is Jane Ah, and I'm one of the assistant cross-country coaches and assistant track coach at Darien High School.
So what are the numbers associated with that start? You said, thanks, Dennis. The you said there's potentially 2 or 3 schools or teams, and varsity and JV and girls and boys, and then there's a start to it. So what we're trying to understand is the impact on the campus, all right? You've got the size of the team coming, you've got buses associated with that, you've got parents coming. They traditionally, my experience is, like to go around the loop and participate and cheer their students on. So if you could help us understand the numbers that would be coming onto campus and that type of impact.
So can I stop Mr. Massat for one moment? I believe that question's for the administration. And while I 100%, if they need information, you can feel they are bringing this gift to us. So I think we need to hear from the administration the answer from Duke's question, and or as coaches, if you think they're ready to answer it, that's fine.
Oh, I think I prefer to have them answer and fill in any gaps that you think might be of question.
All right. I just don't want to keep putting you on the
And
spot.
I think
Okay.
the enthusiasm is the same at the board level. It's an incredible gift. It's, we've done an incredible job up at that campus for all our athletics and all our students, so it's exciting. But, in some degree, that campus is reaching its capacity in terms of its ability to do stuff from a traffic and from a security standpoint. So the questions are more in line with how do we make it safe, how do we make it fun, how do we make it exciting for our students, which I think is all part of the goal.
So is the fair to say the first step for the OTS is to describe a track meet, right?
Yes.
Okay. Cross country. I'm sorry, cross country.
So my name is David Ott. I'm an assistant track coach at Darien High School, and I appreciate the questions. Actually, I think you're, much as we want this project, you're focused on exactly the right things. I appreciate your enthusiasm. Your questions are all the ones you should answer, so we appreciate the opportunity to talk to it. So at a cross-country meet, there are typically 3 races. There is boys varsity, girls varsity, and then a combined novice race. It's called novice. You can think of it as JV. Just in terms of the time, and this gets to the previous question, it's probably the boys varsity race, which is 5K. Realistically, even though they're, a runner like Alex Osberg does run close to 15 minutes, more likely the winner of the race would be about 17 minutes, and the end of the race would be about 24. So you would not really have lapping. The girls, the winner of the race, again, the girls run 4K, which is about 2.5 miles. The winner of the girls' race would probably run about 16, and the back of that pack might be around 22. So again, you don't have the congestion of people on their third lap and people on their second lap. And it's because the novice group is run separately.
Sorry, just to be clear, I'm not talking about congestion of the track. What I'm talking about is safety of the runners on the course when we have 3 entrances into Darien High, and you're going to have to block all of those roads off as people are running through. To me,
So
that could be a potential problem of this, unless we're going to.
So
Unless
let's
we're
let
gonna
the,
have police
let's let
there,
the
or-
OTS finish
Yeah,
describing
sorry.
what a
Yeah.
meet is, and then
Yeah.
questions of security and blocking roads truly are administration.
Okay.
So
Yeah, and
Please
that is
continue.
accurate. So 4A, in that last 8 minutes of the race, you would have runners spread out, so you would need presence at the 3 crossings. And this is similar. Ridgefield has a similar course that crosses roads within the school and entrances the school. It's actually very similar design, and you just need to manage it. And again, with the caveat that we would be having 1 or 2 meets a year. And more often, the real value of this, as much as we would love the meets, and it's outstanding to have home meets, as a training tool. So the meets are separate, 1 or 2. We hope we get around it. I would say in terms of spectators, there's not, we host track meets. As far as we're aware, they don't seem to burden parking. We would actually love to have someone come up and watch them every once in a while. Just suffice it to politely say that we're not overrun with spectators at track meets. And I think it's likely the same at the cross-country meets. Because the course is a loop course, I think it is the case that most parents would just not run all over the course because you could stand in one spot and see the runners come by. They would stand at the start, which is close to the finish, so you would not have to be dealing with parents crossing over the roads trying to get those. They would probably come, they would park, go over to the JV football field, watch the race, and then leave. And that, when we run at other schools that are even, Greenwich's home course is at Todd's Point, which, it doesn't overtake the parking. You have a handful of people there, but they manage the crowd there as well.
Mr. Burke?
Thank you for your work. Thank you for being here tonight. In a typical varsity race, be it girls or boys, how many runners are you putting at the start of that race in a triangle meet or a tri meet?
It varies depending on who the opponents are, how large the opponent teams are. Our teams are fairly large currently, which is nice. But it could be about 100 people on the start among the teams, possibly. And to clarify, the novice race or the JV race, which is a co-ed race, that is a shorter distance than the varsity level races. So that is typically about 1.5 miles.
So then is it fair to presume with a 3-team meet, roughly, if we were trying to look at numbers, about 300 people, 300 athletes participating? 250 to 300,
Total
boys.
in total, that would be reasonable.
Okay. Other board questions? Mrs. Stein?
Mine may be more for the administration. In terms of scheduling the meet or meets, do we have any control over that, or is that through SEAC? Do they give you your date and say, just in terms of what else we have
think
going
that's
on
an
at the high
FCA.
school?
I do know the athletic
FCA.
director is involved in setting the schedule and juggling the field availabilities, that sort of thing.
So we have some
Yeah,
control over.
that's correct.
Board questions? And I believe this is for the administration again, although if you can add color, please feel free. Are there high schools who similarly have their cross-country track at their site?
Yes.
Yeah.
I know Greenwich has Todd's Point, and that's what begged the question.
Yeah,
sorry.
so the schools in the FCAC that have it at their site would be Staples, Ridgefield, New Canaan, which is sort of a special case because the school is at the park,
Yeah.
Fairfield Ludlow, Fairfield Ward. Greenwich is at Todd's Point. Danbury is at Tarry Weil Park, so there's a handful of them.
So it's a mix between some at schools and
Yeah,
some
it's
at local
majority at the
parks.
schools. The two Fairfield, Staples, New Canaan, and Ridgefield are at the schools.
And you said Ridgefield has a similar situation in that they've got roads that have to be blocked off, so they've figured out how to do that, and you've participated in meets up there?
Yeah, we pretty often are scheduled at Ridgefield. They have a very similar kind of course, and they have 2 driveway crossings or parking lot access to the school crossings. They utilize parent volunteers to stand there to manage the traffic, and that is also a multiple loop course. So that's what they do there,
Okay.
in a similar situation.
Board questions? Mrs. McNamara?
Mine is definitely for the administration. Just going back to the memorandum, in the first point, you say that the cross-country running track that lies solely on or adjacent to the high school property, are you talking about Diller in that case?
I'm talking about on the high school property itself, not Diller. So that this is one of actually 3 conditions, but the first condition is that the high school portion of the track will be off limits to any persons who are neither students nor staff at Darien High School on all days when school is in session during the regular school year and in the summer. And the signage is the second condition, and that's also basically to tell people they're not permitted to be on that track when school is in session, and they're never permitted to walk their dogs on the track.
Okay, so you're not talking, the adjacent was what was confusing me, because the adjacent property I read is the Diller, so
No,
you're
this
not
is
referring to
solely
Diller.
for our high school property, because the Diller property is really town property, and it's a town park, and it's under the jurisdiction of the Parks and Recreation Department.
Okay,
And
then
so
to
if
what
people wanna-
property are you referring to as adjacent? What area is the
What I
adjacent?
meant was a tract that essentially cuts across and through and around
Oh, okay, okay.
Staples High, Staples.
Like across the street.
It's his
I heard
first time in
Staples.
all these
Gary
months.
Ann
Only
High
2 months, it
School.
took you 2 months to go there.
You guys
Okay,
made me
I thought
nervous,
for
what can I tell you?
Okay, and so, all right, so we're talking about just our track when school is in, for the days that school is in session.
It's in session, right.
Okay, perfect, thank you.
And
I'm sorry, go ahead.
by the way, I wanted to add a third condition to this, if I might.
Okay.
It's my expectation now that, and Joe, correct me if I'm wrong, that DAF is going to be presenting, along with you, to the Planning and Zoning Commission and the Parks and Recreation Commission, should the board give its conditional approval to this track, correct?
That is correct. We'd have to
Okay.
go before Planning and Zoning and certainly the Environmental Protection Commission.
Because I'm suggesting to the board that the board approve this track conditionally, depending upon final approval from Planning and Zoning and Parks and Rec. And once that is all completed, that it come back to the board so that the board can accept the gift with the full knowledge that it's met the requirements of all of these boards, and recognizing the DAF is going to fight the good fight with P&Z and Parks and Rec.
That's correct.
Mr. Maroney?
And just one further question, I think, maybe to you or Mr. Lynch, is do we have to do anything with the water and having mosquitoes or bugs or anything like that with the standing water there?
We can't spray anything.
Well, you know,
No, but
I learned from Mr. Lynch today that right next to our property, we have right here in this building, we have a pump, and we have all other kinds of drainage systems to ensure that the water, which would otherwise run off into neighbors' properties, is kept away from those properties. So I suspect that when it comes to insects and so on, we would treat that like we would treat water in any other area that's close to our schools and our property.
We know we can't spray.
And spray.
No,
We can
well, yeah,
spot spray.
you know that. We have a detention basin, two at the high school that are dry, one by the entrance from High School Lane, one behind the high school. So they would have running water in them after a heavy rain. Then there's a detention basin down behind the baseball field, the varsity baseball field. That has water in it all year long. So, you know, would you get insects, aquatic life, et cetera? Yes. You know, if it's a stinging type animal, we could spray. But otherwise, you know, no. I mean, there's a stream on the Diller property. It's the same as Stony Brook. It runs, it, you know, circles the outside of the high school property and then heads down to, I think it's Gorham's Pond, right? So, you know, and that's running water. And there's another stream that runs into that pond on the Diller property. So that's always moving water, but as far as like a vernal pool, stagnant water, I don't know that there is that on Diller most of the year. I think we've had a tremendous amount of rain since July. You know, way more than we're used to.
Mr. Deneen?
I'm not sure who to direct this to, but if you put the map up again, perhaps, this is gonna be used for training and a couple of meets. And I'd like to understand and make sure that we understand the impact to that new turf field. I mean, thanks to the DAF, there's been a lot of investment in these turf fields, but from a maintenance perspective, you have this repetitive path of people running through that field, and are we comfortable are we comfortable of what the impact could be on a new turf
Yeah,
field?
just to clarify, there's, if you remember, there's two different routes, right? There's the competition route, which goes across the field.
Right.
But then there's the day-to-day practice route, which actually runs on the outside perimeter of the field,
Okay.
right? So that'll keep the wear off the field.
So can you refresh for my memory, and I do remember the two routes, is it just not wide enough behind that baseball backstop to do the formal track?
That's correct, right, yeah.
Behind
Because
there.
you have to have a large area, because you have
So
a
many
number of
kids
runners,
around,
so you need
yeah.
to funnel them down.
Can you also speak a little bit, if Diller has wetlands, the high school does as well, and I know we do, is that part of the process? You will go to the Wetlands Commission, you'll go to EPC, you'll make sure it's okay, or where are we on wetlands on our property, and are we within the correct setback?
Sure. On the high school property, we have flagged wetlands. You know, we've had it since the initial high school project for the construction back in 2003, or I think 'cause that's when it was under full swing. But we are not impacting any wetlands on the high school property at all.
Okay.
Right. So, so the impact to the wetlands is going to be on the Diller property, and of course, we do have to go to
So
EPC
all
for
those
that.
concerns will be handled if anyone raises them?
Correct.
Okay.
Can I just add one thing? The freshman field hockey team practices on that baseball field in the fall, so there are other, I mean, it does get some use outside of the runners.
So I guess my question would be, and I think I asked Mr. Manfredoni at last meeting, and he said he would run events concurrent to meets. My concern is the administration and or the high school administration telling us that they are prepared and or ready to welcome these 200 to 300 students running on our properties during meet days? Which I'd like to be able to, so I'm hoping the answer is yes, but I do need, I mean, it is 200 to 300 bodies that we're adding on those days, so do we have plans to manage those?
I've discussed this with the high school principal, the athletic director, the assistant principals. They've discussed it with the coaches, and yes, they are planning to accommodate whatever needs to be accommodated, and they're also going to arrange schedules so that they minimize the impact wherever they can. And as for security, we also plan on using parent volunteers. We'll use members of our own staff, and where necessary, if necessary, because we're not certain yet, we'll use, we'll work through our resource officer to engage the police department if and when necessary. So I think we're in good shape for planning for events that take place simultaneously with this, just as we would on days when we have all kinds of sports coming together on the field, and followed oftentimes by community participation. So
Mr. Brown?
I'm
sorry.
confident.
Okay, Mr. Brown.
Thank you. Briefly, I'm just looking at the line after the soccer field and where we're going across the baseball. Basically, is it vaguely from first base straight to third base across the diamond?
Right there, yes.
Is there any reason we can't run them outside the lines, down outside the first base, third base line?
Around here, I think because of the fencing arrangement and the bases, and you don't want a tight turn
It's
across
just
there.
too narrow. Okay,
Right.
thank you.
This is maybe for the aughts. It seems, and the board can feel free to correct me, that the questions of management come up around a meet. If the board was to hold off on meets to study what a meet would do, would that impact your program greatly? Would this still benefit? If the board would say we need to study the impact of a meet for 1 year, what would that do to your plans and the kids, and what would the impact of that be?
We do hope to use this on a daily basis for training purposes. So we have much greater utilization of the track than just for meets. So for meets, Darien hasn't had a home meet in, I can't remember how many years it's been since it used to be held at Weburn. For the kids to have a home meet would be just a really nice experience. Every other team enjoys having home contests, and it affords an opportunity for them to celebrate Senior Day, as the girls team enjoys doing. It allows them to have their parents and friends easily come to see them if they wish to. Have a day where they have shorter travel, then we're always on the road for our competitions. So it's we definitely would prefer to have the track and have a hold on meets than to not have it. And if you, I'm sure if you talked with athletic directors at schools that do host home meets, and we also recalled that Trumbull and St. Joseph's High Schools also have meets on their property, and they, it's not really, doesn't seem like much of a fuss when they, this all happens at those schools. And we do often notice that there are other sports teams going on either in games or practices concurrently with the meets. Many of these courses on school property run around these different sports fields, so we have plenty of time to see all. There's quite a lot of activity going on the school property usually when we're there at meets. So it does work out well, and I think you would have plenty of ability to research that, with the other schools and how they find it.
Okay, Mr. Burke.
If in studying this and working it out in study capacity, under the FCAC rules, are you allowed to limit the amount of participants in a cross-country meet, instead of saying everybody runs and has 100 runners? Could you have teams and say, all right, bring your top 10 or bring your top 15 if we thought there was a capacity issue?
Yeah, I would say, I think, I think you could do it in theory. I think, one of the great things about cross-country is the spirit of it has been that, we take people, we have big teams. And I think the issue, just watching similar number of runners run at, Richfield's course, up at the top is probably 2 or 3 feet wide. And they have a big team, so when we go there, it's big teams. I think the issue of size is manageable, and again, there was a previous question about the scheduling, and there is a degree of flexibility where maybe in the first year you were hosting a meet, the meet you would host would not be Danbury and Richfield at Darien, who are the 3 biggest programs. It might be West Hill and St. Joe's at Darien, and then it's our kids and about 20 more. So I think there's ways to experiment this, but I think we'd like to, what makes our sport special is the inclusivity, and I think that's something that we would want to violate.
Mr. Janino?
I'll add just one more thing. I know we had discussed too in the first year of the PAT that there would be certainly only one meet if we were going to, one meet is very common, so we might host on a typical year 1 or 2 meets. Not more than 2 meets, and not necessarily 2 meets every year. And certainly in the first year, we would not seek to host more than 1 meet.
So, and just so I understand, because I do know some schools host 4 teams, and I don't know cross-country, so forgive me. Are you able to say we can host 3 teams, or we can host 4, or we can host 2? Are you able, maybe less so than cutting down teams, say, I couldn't host 5 teams. I couldn't host 500 kids.
The typical cross-country meet is scheduled in the FCAC for 3 teams.
Okay.
And usually the pairings that they do, there are some smaller schools and smaller teams. And so usually it's set up so that it's one smaller team that's put with some of the other teams.
So 3 is really the standard.
3 is the standard. And usually one of the 3 is a fairly small team. I mean, some of the teams in the FCAC have only 6 people on them. So I mean, the range is quite wide.
Okay. Mr. Deneen and then Mr. Browning.
I think this is for the administration. Have we started to, while these are public meetings, we have our core group of friends that always come. Have we started to socialize this with the neighbors?
That is the responsibility of the Planning and Zoning Commission. And I anticipate that when the DAF brings this forward to Planning and Zoning, it'll be a public hearing. Any neighbors, if they have any concerns, questions, issues, they will address it with P&Z, but it's P&Z's is the agency to make the final decision as to how to resolve the issues with the neighbors.
I don't disagree with you. There's just a history of neighbors feeling they haven't been included in stuff that's gone on that campus. So while I understand that process, I think we have to think about continuing to be good neighbors.
So is that, so that puts a finer point on it. DAF is the applicant of the gift?
DAF will take this gift through the processes, P&Z and Parks and Rec. And can I just state, I'm very sensitive to the neighbor issue because apparently, and I don't want to get into details, but there was a recent incident where P&Z was not involved with the neighbors, and apparently it caused some friction, and it didn't really help the school district or DAF or P&Z. So I'm trying to play this by the book, recognizing that yes, we want to have good relationships with our neighbors, and we also, I believe, at least from my perspective, is follow the necessary protocols for dealing with the neighbors. And truthfully, it's P&Z that has to deal with the neighbors. And in Connecticut, in my experience in the two districts where I've been, it's always P&Z that has the responsibility for dealing with the neighbors, with the Board of Education understanding that they want good relationships with the neighbors, but the final settlements with the neighbors has to be through P&Z.
Tara, didn't you have that conversation with John Cini at OPC? A little bit about public hearings and...
So to be clear, whoever is the applicant of a change needs to notify the neighbors, and P&Z holds a public meeting and the neighbors come and testify there, which is why I was putting the finer point on who is the applicant. If the Darien schools are the applicant, that is one thing. If the DAF is the applicant, I will tell the board my own thinking on this, is that if the DAF is proposing a contemplated gift for us, then that is quite frankly incredibly generous and sounds like it'll service a lot of kids. They need to present us a whole gift, and so they need to go through all the processes and then come back to us with all the approvals, which would include neighbor conversations, public hearings, any stipulations P&Z puts on this. So I appreciate them coming to us now saying, are you interested in this? Because I think that's really what we're deciding. Are we interested in this gift such that they can go forward and say the Darien schools are willing to accept it with all the propers and the procedures put in place. So it is a conditional acceptance. This is not actually quite accepting the track yet because we don't know what planning and zoning might say about it. And I do think that's probably the right place for the neighbors, but certainly I think Dr. Landon's correct. If we do it in the proper procedure, it's not that we don't want to engage the neighbors, we just want to have the engagement happen in the right body. And that isn't ours if the DAF is applying for the gift. Mr. Maroney.
Yeah, just a point I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, coaches, is that we can, or you can change the course. So for the start, just to run across the baseball diamond can be for the start, for that 30 seconds of the start. The field hockey team can have a water break, and then they could run around the outside part of the loop for the second two loops. So it would only impact 90 seconds maybe or so of the field hockey practice. So it wouldn't tie up the field the entire day.
That is correct, and that's important to know because I think it may be a little confusing that that segment on the turf field is only for the start of each of the races, and then the loops don't cross through that. They go on the exterior portion of the loop, so that's very important.
That was not clear. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, it is a little bit confusing, and so that is just to accommodate the large the large crowd at the start, and so that's the only time that that's used. So if you're doing a continuous loop, you would not even go across the turf whatsoever.
And
so
I would think the other part for me as well is I understand maybe for the first year to have limited teams, but I would hope that we can work out our potential problems, because I think it would be advantageous to host a home meet against Ridgefield and Danbury, where you know the turns and you know where to capture the race and have a home field advantage, as opposed to always going to Ridgefield or to
Dennis wants to win.
Yes, and we do too, and there is a home team
I'm not saying the
advantage.
board is going to go there. I just wanted to know what the impact to the team
No,
would
that's-
be.
That is correct. And just to clarify, also, there can be 4 teams in a meet. Usually 2 of the 4 are smaller teams. And as I indicated, there is a wide range in team size. So it's not all, 4 teams doesn't mean that they're all having 100 kids each, so.
But it's still fair to say it's a meet is roughly 200 to
Yes.
300, and the administration feels that they can handle that increase of students on campus.
Absolutely.
Okay, any other board questions? The superintendent has a resolution.
To which I'd like to add a condition.
Okay.
Okay, so I am recommending that the Board of Education conditionally accept this gift, dependent upon DAF moving forward, and Joe will be with them all the way, with DAF moving forward to planning and zoning and to Parks and Rec to get the necessary approvals that may be necessary so that DAF can come back to the Board of Education for final approval. And as part of that approval, it has to be understood, the other 2 parts of that resolution, that the school property, the track will be off limits on the, wherever it abuts or is adjacent to Darien High School during the school day when school is in session and at summer school. And at no times are unauthorized persons to be on the track during the school day, at least on our property. And at no time are dogs to be permitted. And we'll get the necessary signage. DAF will support us in that. We'll get the language from the police department. And when all is said and done, we'll have a good cross-country track.
I will turn that into a motion. Just give me a second. May I have a motion that recommends, may I have a motion that supports the DAF moving forward to apply for a gift to the Darien Public Schools conditionally based on governmental approvals. Those conditions must include that the cross-country track, I'm going to read it, but it's going to be 1 and 2. So you don't have to take it all down. That the cross-country running track lies solely on or adjacent to the property of Darien High School shall be officially designated off limits to any persons who are neither students nor staff at Darien High School on all days when school is in session. I'm going to amend it. On all school days during the regular school year and when summer school is in session. Which the board should note the change I am making there is Monday through Friday. Doesn't matter if school is out. And at no time are persons with dogs permitted to use the running track to walk or run their dogs.
So you're talking about President's Day, it would be closed.
No, I'm talking that at 2:30 the track doesn't open up. I think it reads a little ambiguous.
Right.
And so I think what the board discussed was that Monday through Friday, that track would be closed, given that students practice after school and people might be confused that they could be running during practice, and that Mondays through Fridays they're using it at their own risk.
That's
So-
how I took it to read, that it was
Okay,
closed.
so I'm
but-
just making sure.
I think you're
Can
right.
you do the
Could be
in
2 o'clock.
Yes.
Right.
Can
It's
I
a-
just make a
Oh, it doesn't
recommendation
open at
that
2.
you change the motion to just reference that rather than take verbatim what he's writing? Do you want the motion to have all that, or you want to reference?
No, so here's the motion.
I-
We'll do it again. Sorry, guys, it's a little bit long. That the Darien Board of Education
Motion to,
supports the DAF applying for all necessary permissions to pursue the gift
wait, you have to go slower. Sorry.
No,
All necessary
to
permissions
pursue the gift of a contemplated cross-country track provided the appropriate governmental approvals and returning to the board for final approval with the stipulation, sorry.
And returning. And what?
And returning, but with the stipulations that the cross-country track shall be closed on all school days during the regular school year and when summer school is in session. At no times, sorry, it's long. And at no time,
No, sorry.
stick with us, guys. It's a big project, it's a big gift.
Yes.
And at no times are persons with dogs to be permitted to use the running track, to walk or run their dogs.
So moved.
Wait, no, wait, we will also require
No.
Yeah.
Kids are on a track to walk their dogs or run.
Run or walk
Yeah,
their
yeah.
dogs.
Okay.
And dependent upon necessary signage. So does everyone understand what we have in this motion? So what you have in this motion is the DAF may apply to move forward with the gift of a running track. Once they get all proper governmental approvals, they may come back to us with a final gift, but that gift must include the fact that the track is closed during school days. There cannot be people with dogs on the track, and appropriate signage must be in place. May I have a motion?
So moved.
Mr. Maroney. Mr. Deneen will second. All in favor? That is unanimous? And thank you very much to the
Thank
odds
you.
for all the information.
Thank you.
Wait, yes, way to pinch it. And Joe, thank you for being here.
Good luck.
I think Joe's off to P and Z right now.
That's exciting.
Yeah, all right. Believe it or not, we will move forward. We will follow up on the January 5th board meeting questions of the 2019-2020 proposed Board of Education budget. Dr. Landon.
So we have, well, first let me say this, I think that, you should be very proud of, not your superintendent, but of the people who work with the superintendent. Because considering that we've got these questions on Saturday and put it all together tonight, I think it's a yeoman task, and they deserve all the credit for
Thank you.
response.
Very
Yes,
much so.
thank you.
Thank you.
So, we have provided you, and the public has a copy as well, as the various questions as we understood them. Oh, I'm sorry. We have prepared for you, and the public has a packet as well as the questions as we understood them and our responses. And let us go through each of the individuals who are responsive to this. We can start with special ed, RSC 24, and that would be Shirley, which how do we account for unanticipated costs in special education?
Thank you, Dr. Landon. Good evening. And it's explanatory in our presentation. On the first part of the question is, what do we do when we have unanticipated costs that come about as a result of IEPs that happen after the budget cycle, and unanticipated placements, recommendations, new entrants. At the time we prepare our budget, we also have pending placement recommendations. So where we are able to respond to those fiscal needs are with budget controls and budget transfers into RC 24. For the proposed legal services and in the narrative we explained,
This is a question I think that was raised by Mr. Burke, I think. What are we paying for our attorneys and the like? We have listed here what the current rates are, 2018-19 hourly for partners, managing partners, associates, and paralegals at Shipman and Goodwin, and what they are proposing to be implemented next year.
The way we'll do is we'll go through our C24 questions, and then we'll come back if the board has follow-up on any of these.
The next question, I think, is from Mr. Feeney.
Correct. We were asked to break out the legal bills under RC 24, and the question was whether or not that we had enough. The year-to-date expenditure leading into November has been $141,850. As we run that out into the month of June, we're looking at a year-end projection of $323,000. A significant portion of the 141 that has currently been spent to date, 35% of it can be attributed to 2 pending cases, which would equate to
35%?
35, yes, which would equate to around $49,000. The next item, to provide an update to the excess cost chart history with the percentage of the state of Connecticut. We do have an attachment in the back that breaks down the chart that the board is familiar with. It's on chart A. It shows a history of excess cost reimbursements going back from 2008 to 2009 to where we currently are projecting in 2019, 2020. And as you'll see, in 2008, 2009, we did have a state reimbursement rate of 100%, and you'll see how that fluctuates from year to year leading up to 2017, 2018. For 2018 and 2019, the state of Connecticut has not provided a reimbursement rate. This typically occurs after our second filing. Our second filing would be in March, and we typically hear this in May, June area. Another question was what the snapshot of where our 3 filings are and where they ended up. So on the bottom left-hand side, you will see that we broke out each in particular year going back to 15-16, the December filing, the March filing, and the September filing. And you will see that it varies. If we went back to 2015, 2016, our December filing was $3.4 million, our March filing was $3.51 million, and our September filing was less than our December filing at 3.37. With that being said, since then, the trend has been increasing, as you'll see when you compare December to the September filing. Another question was how many students does this entail, the reimbursement threshold? And on the right-hand side, we go back to 2015, 2016 to where we're estimating in 19-20. And again, this is the in-district and out-of-district placement students that qualify for reimbursement that we talked about on Saturday.
Hey, the next question, classification of students, and I think Shirley can answer that one.
So we were asked to disaggregate and show, and this actually is the reporting to the Connecticut State Department of Education that we do annually. And it shows, if you look at, the question was under other health impairment, how many students are eligible as under ADD and ADHD. In October of 16, it was 140 out of 190. If you look at the subsequent year in 2017, the number shows you 162 out of 220. And in October of 2018 of this year, on the October 1 CDEC, it was 162 out of 224. Also the question under specific learning disabilities in the specific area of dyslexia, how many students are identified in IEPs? And if you look at the numbers, they're explanatory there. Also 9 students out of 194, 14 out of 182, and 15 this year as of the October 1st date out of 180. The next chart, we were asked one of the questions about out-of-district tuition lines during 2018 and 2019. We show the breakdown there in the 2 columns, which are explanatory from 2018-19. It's divided by IEP placements, unilateral placement, and net costs total. If you go on to look at chart A1 in your packets, when we look at the breakdown of out-of-district students by grade level and disability, give you a moment to turn to attachment A1. We divided that, if you look line, by elementary, middle, and high school and transition programs of students. Just to keep in mind when you look at that, other health impairment, ADD and ADHD is included under other health impairment. You asked us to disaggregate it, so we did, of the number of students, both in the IEP placements. You also asked to look at the number of students who are identified as specifically dyslexic under SLD, and we did that as well. May I go on to ELP?
Sure.
The
You know what, I'm sorry, let's stop at special education, because there's a lot of information here. Are there special education questions? Do you need a minute to digest?
I just want to can I just make sure I understood the CDAC chart? Other health impairment, ADD, ADHD, the 190, in the October 2016, the 190 is the total number of what, ADHD? And
Of other
140 is ADD?
No, the first number shows the number of classified students with learning disabilities, and the 9 next to that shows who are specifically classified as dyslexic under that category.
Okay, so in the row above, it's 190 in OHI, and then 140 of them have either ADD or ADHD.
Yes.
Thank you.
One question that, that might not be a student's only issue for accommodation. There could be additional issues, so you could have a student who has identified ADD who has something as well, or not. They might also receive speech and language.
So actually, I'm glad you asked that question. Looking at that, if you go back and look at your attachment 1, understanding that actually sometimes as much as 50%, but there's a high incidence of comorbidity in students who have, that's why ADD and ADHD. You're also looking at students, that may be the primary classification on their IEP, but they also present with learning disabilities, anxiety, OCD, language disorders, tic disorders. So again, it may be the primary classification on their IEP, but it doesn't necessarily the solo reason why they require that level of service.
But then for the purposes of this report, the CDAC report, are those children only counted once?
Yes.
Okay. Just wanted to make sure they're counted for their
Under
primary.
OHI, other health impairment.
Mr. Burke.
Thank you for the rates, the attorney rates. 2 quick questions. One, are the 1920 rates, have we approved them, approved these hourly raises? And also, do we produce to our legal counsel billing guidelines where we delineate, the expectation of how many, managing partner hours versus, associate hours are undertaken?
When we get a monthly bill, and for 2018-19, the column 1 is the rates that are being applied. We see a breakdown of numbers of hours, part-time and in some cases, we're at multiple hours. We see who it is that is assigned to this particular issue, and whether it be a partner, managing partner, or a paralegal, and the rates are applied accordingly. But we all go through it actually to check to make sure that they're all legitimate.
I understand that, but my question was, do we have billing guidelines that we promulgate to our council concerning their billing and how they undertake work? And my other question was, have we actually approved the 1920 rates yet?
Go ahead.
Which means it's assigning only paralegals for FOIA requests,
Or for instance, we won't pay for attorneys conferencing with each other in billing. I mean, there are many corporate clients or institutional clients or even government clients that have specific things that they will pay for and interactions that they pay for and some that they
will not, which is typical, in the industry. And so my question was, do we have any kind of guidelines that we give to our attorneys? And the second question was the 1920 rates that you have listed here in this document. Are these rates that the district or your office has already agreed to, or are they still proposed and subject to negotiation?
We only received recent notices to what they would be, so we have not acted upon those in any way. As to the guidelines, our guidelines are pretty specific, that the only persons who may contact an attorney is the chair of the board, and the superintendent, unless the superintendent approves a designation. So, for example, if we have a personnel issue, the attorney would contact my office, and if I can't handle it, then Marge talks with the attorney. If it's a business-related matter, it goes to Mike. Special ed is all involved with planning and placement team, meetings, mediation, and so on and so forth. And there, Shirley essentially operates with only one of the partners who's assigned to our district, but they don't act unilaterally. Only.
So I think behind your question, because it sounds like they don't have the same corporate structure. I think behind Mike's question is, do we have any concerns that we are getting billed at a rate for a managing director when we could be using an associate? Or do we feel that our use of the managing director, if that's a role we use, or a partner, is appropriate? I will tell you from a board member, since I'm the one who makes contact with the attorney, when it is appropriate to deal with an associate, I deal with an associate. But if it is a board legal matter where we have representation, I deal with Mr. Mooney. He is more than willing at times to say, this is a matter an associate can handle for me. So I do feel from a board standard, he certainly doesn't say you can only deal with me. Oftentimes he says this is a matter that I'd be happy to pass on to an associate and or a partner depending on the level of time. So from a board standpoint with my communications, I feel that we might not striate it quite like that because the complexity of some of the issues we deal with. I can't talk of the day-to-day to the administration, but my experience with Shipman is Tom's more than happy not to deal with us when he doesn't have to, in a good way.
And for example, when we get into negotiations and there are a lot of computations and analyses that are required, paralegal does it all. No attorney doesn't even touch that. When we go into negotiations, obviously we're represented by counsel. For the most part, it's with an associate, or it has been with an associate, unless associate gets bumped up to partner, then we'll often stay with the person who started as an associate and goes to partner.
But it may be something if we look at rates to discuss with them.
And we can discuss that too. The board had discussing strategies for dealing with our attorneys, and I think we can have an opportunity to do that, to discuss it with our own attorneys and other attorneys if the board so wishes.
Can I just ask an excess I'm sorry, someone else? Dennis, go ahead.
Going back to the legal bill question, you said 35% is just on 2 FOIA cases. Is the other, what is the remainder of the 65%? Is that negotiations? Is it other FOIAs? Do we know? And what is in our projected numbers, is that FOIA or negotiations or other?
Does FOIA hit this account or FERPA?
FOIA, we're discussing.
Yeah.
Right, in
RC24 is just for special ed, so anything that has to do with negotiations of union contracts would come out of RC16.
Okay, so this is just this is just this.
Correct.
Okay.
And the rest of the 65% would basically be for individual issues that are popping up with students and families.
Sorry.
We talk about excess cost for a minute on this chart, and we can we will continue to talk about excess costs, so we don't need to go too far into it tonight. But, I think it's important to note that looking at, the chart on the right, and this is a good way of looking at it, I do think at times excess cost seems to be assumed that it's out-of-district placements that excess cost is tied to. And your chart really shows it's quite variable. Sometimes it's out-of-district, sometimes it's in-district, and those numbers can change such that we certainly always look to educate our children in district where we can and it's most appropriate, but sometimes we talk about the bubble moving through. Dennis and I both do, but I think this illustrates that anyone moving through an out-of-district school may or may not affect excess costs. Does that make sense to everyone? I do think oftentimes people tie excess cost to out-of-district, and it's not.
More often, it's in district every year.
It certainly, and this is why it's good to look at these charts in a new way sometimes, it's certainly, we are doing the right thing in providing services in district and out of district.
I don't know if you have enough data to say that it's not a bubble for out of district, because it depends on where those numbers started in probably 12, 13, 13,
Well, I'm not saying
14,
it's
but-
not, I'm just saying that's not the only thing driving excess costs.
Yes.
So let me be more precise on that. It may still be a bubble, but that might not be the only effect on excess cost. All right, I'm sure we will continue our excess cost conversation unless someone else. Mrs. McNamara?
Different question, different topic.
Okay. On special ed? Okay.
A1 on the chart, could you just remind me again, for the out-of-district unilateral placement, specific learning disability, could you give me an example of a specific learning disability that is not dyslexia?
It can be dysgraphia, it can be written language, it can be in a comprehension area that's not related to phonology for reading, so there can be many areas. There can be written language in other areas.
Okay, and then other health impairment, could just be any, what would be one example of that?
Other than ADD and ADHD,
Correct.
it can be several things. It can be anxiety disorder that stands alone, it can be depressive disorder, and some of the single disorders, as well as it can be a medical, a fatiguing or a medical fragile piece as well.
Thank you.
Any other questions on special ed tonight, which does not mean that we won't relook at all these RCs at some point. Okay, moving on to ELP.
The question we were responding to, the first question was, should we bring in typical peers on Friday? We were not, and we're not asking the board to consider a 5-day ELP program, but we just wanted to clarify for your information that students who have intensive special education needs are brought in on Friday, and those children are brought in for either special education teacher services, OT, PT, speech, to really pre-teach and post-teach, to really work on the implementation of their goals so that they can be successful in their Monday through Thursday program. They're brought in to be able to generalize social skills, language skills, and other areas that are consistent with their IEP. If it all could be taken care of within the Monday through Thursday program, a PBT will not recommend that additional service, but when they're not meeting their goals, then they are recommended for Friday services. I think on Saturday we equated to the idea of extended school day. It's an additional level of service that is necessary in order to implement the IEP.
So is it a better way, because I know we use IEP a lot, is it a FAPE issue? Is it they need these, it's determined that they need these services in order to access their education?
And realize their goals,
Okay.
yes.
Sorry, I skipped ahead to questions. I didn't mean to.
Is there a total cap enrollment of 90? So, I know there was conversation on Saturday. We can't cap ELP because in order for child find, and we did cite the citation of the regulations in here, depending on how many children are here and are identified, we need to provide a program for them. Child find under the current regulations requires districts to be able to provide an included environment for preschool age children who've been identified by the PPT and have an appropriate program. The requirement of having a 50-50 of typical developing peers and children with special needs is something we need to hold and comply with. We also report, just so the board is aware, the committee, we report out to the state every year, give our numbers to show that we are in compliance and we are meeting FAPE for our students in our ELP program. The next question was asked, how do our Darien ELP program compared to other preschools in the area for tuition increase? That is on chart B, that shows local programs. If you turn to B, which is upside down, so just turn it around, and you'll see what the current cost is. And if you look at that, you'll see that we're in the same area and range for current tuition increases. Question also came up with the reduced and free lunch. We do show that free and reduced lunch does represent 1.95% of our student population, and it does show that typical peers who qualify for free and reduced lunch do receive a reduced rate. The next question is, how do you account for instances where the number of students of IEPs outnumber the number of students without IEPs? And Laura prepared and showed examples in the narrative that when that does occur based on the lottery, she's gone out and used posting information on a website, flyers in local stores, engaging local realtors and getting the word out to families and prospective families of openings. There's been blasts on the CDSP websites as well, and placing ads in local newspapers. She does cite also that, just so we're aware, that over the last 10 years, it has only happened on 2 times, that there was an over referral of children with special needs to the typical peers, and she was able to, with using those approaches, have a successful ratio on both occasions. And lastly, on class size and capping it, just so the board is informed, we're not really capping those classes. Our preferred number of enrollment is not to exceed 15 students. Again, we can't cap classes. We have not had to go above that. But again, depending on the number of children who are referred with special needs, we need to balance our classes.
Boards, comments, and questions. Mrs. McCammon.
Mr. Feeney, it's, well, first off, thank you for all of this. I should have said that before with the special ed one. I also had asked for the schedule of tuition increases. You did last year. If we could get that, please, for EOP.
So
I think you had a schedule that showed a series of rate increases or something, showed our tuition over time.
So what I did do, I'm sorry, I had understood that as doing a cross comparison of what the surrounding communities actually were.
Which we do have, thank you.
Yes.
Yes.
So if I'm missing, you'd like to see our history as to over 5 years as to what our rate, okay.
I think you have it, I think it's just
Yep.
adding.
Okay.
Thank you.
So I'll give it at the next board meeting on the 15th.
Other questions? Dennis? Mr.
I
Moretti?
just want to make sure that with the additional students going in on Fridays, that doesn't create any compliance concerns of not having one-to-one.
No, it doesn't. Thank you.
So if we don't cap class size, am I correct? And I'm really thinking for Oxford, it's where all these questions are coming from. If we don't cap class size, it's my understanding that these classrooms are licensed per square foot per student. So how do we know we're building classrooms and or have classrooms the right size for students if we must take children, we must keep a 1-to-1 ratio, and we must have a license per square foot per child classroom? And I understand part of it, the answer is it's going to be a guessing game.
No, actually, when we went through developing the Oxbridge specs, we looked at class size of what the regulations are. I don't have those specs right handy, but I'm quite sure we based it on, I'll go back.
Mike Lynch can answer that.
Oh, right. You do that.
We also made provisions that the kindergarten classes and the pre-kindergarten class rooms would be the same size, the maximum size, so that in the event that there was more pre-K needed, they could move into a kindergarten class. And kindergarten and first grade would have equal, so you could just move sizes up. You wouldn't run out of square footage.
what's
And it's really not square footage per pupil, it's square footage per class.
What's the maximum number of kids we can put in a K class or an ELP class in Oxbridge? Do you know?
Let me just.
Well, the maximum number of people, students, adults, whatever, that you can have in a room, it's really 25 square feet per person. But there's another number that's how many square feet you need to have a appropriately sized first grade, 10th grade, science lab, art room. That's a totally different number. Our pre-K size is based on the state recommendation. We also made the kindergarten classrooms, several of them are the pre-K size, so that they would be big enough if we had to go that way.
So can we double check for me, and I just because I'd like to check on the answer that how we license rooms for ELP. We just double check and get back to me on that. Because I had always thought, at least from local preschools, how they have to do it, and may be different because they're not public schools. It is per square foot per pupil. And so that may be different for us, but if we can just double check on the state standards.
We run larger than that.
Okay.
They run a smaller classroom for equal number of children
Okay.
than we do.
I like that planning. We just want to check on the licensing. And really what I want to go back is, I looked at the Oxbridge specs today, and it has at 17-18 us ending with 102 students enrolled in ELP. So I just want to make sure the numbers are right. For this building committee, once we find out who's populated on it, I'd want to make sure we're giving them really strong information if they're building this.
We'll check on that and certainly provide that to Dr. Landon to get back to you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mrs. McCowan, you had a question?
No, thank you.
Other questions on ELP?
Just for clarification again, I think it was given on Saturday, but what's our current ratio of typicals to,
We're within the 50-50 ratio.
but are we,
Are we under in some,
I mean,
At the moment?
yeah, I mean, it's not, I mean, what, I guess the question is more, what do we typically run? Are we always at the edge, or are we, normally, I mean, Mr. Feeney was talking about we backfill, so we have room, but how much do we backfill? Is it 4 or 5 that we're that close every time to being at 90, or? I guess
it's
I
a
think
rolling,
I'm
you
to
know,
the point with Mrs. Ockman. I'm worried that we're not going to build enough at Oxbridge. And so I'm wondering where our historical trends are to maybe predict the future, and maybe we have to revisit that.
So as I understand it, we have enrollment projections as of October 1. But ELP seems to have a variable swing because students come into the program based on identification, so they can swing significantly by October 1 to June. And so we then make sure we have enough typical to remain with a 50-50 ratio. So I think what Mr. Maroney and I are questioning is, let's just make sure when we build this school, and you may have done it, but I think we would be satisfied to kind of see how we did it. That we're building rooms to the proper size and are the correct number of classrooms. And it is good to know that we have that flex space between kindergarten, but if my kindergarten's full and my first grade and my second grade is full, where do I move everybody? So that's all. Maybe the methodology, because I think we maybe didn't appreciate such fluctuation swings from October to June. We rarely see that 12 students in other grades. Other board questions? Okay, we'll move on to the elementary schools.
With the elementary schools, we will have a response to the Board of Education around the elementary school psychologist planned for January 15th. The second question that came up was regarding the number of gifted children that we had. I'm not sure if that was actually specific to the elementary, but we gave you both sets of numbers, 250 at the elementary and 114 at the secondary.
Given that psychologists are for the 15th, are there any other questions on elementary schools? All right, we'll move forward. RC 19 curriculum.
The question that was asked on RC 19 was around dues and memberships and how we divide them, and if there was any way that we could find efficiencies within those dues and memberships. And the answer to that was not really. The memberships in particular at the high school cover associations such as NEOSC, the National Council of Teachers of English Language Arts, same with World Language, same with math. The RC 19 covers most of the administrative resources. It allows for professional development, as I mentioned on Saturday. So there aren't efficiencies in terms of combining.
Okay, any curriculum questions? Seeing none, we'll move on to summer school.
Under RC 23 Summer School, there was a comment regarding the consultant services line 807. Response will be that when the board adopts the budget, we will update the consultant services to state the summer school personnel. The second question we had under 23 was, can you provide the changes in fees of our programs over the past 2 years? And we did break down a couple of the classes, all of the classes that are going to have a fee increase for 18 and 19 for you to get a feel.
Okay, any questions on summer school? Seeing none?
On the middle school counselors, Middlesex counselors, we'll give you an update when we give you the update on psychologists on the 15th.
Okay, any MMS questions? Move forward to RC 11, athletics, physical education, and health.
Under RC 11 Athletics, PE, and Health, we attached a new schedule, which is attached as C, which updates the uniform replacement schedule as we had discussed, which includes tennis and unified sports. The second item was to break out or create a new line for the assistant director, which is currently in the director position, and when the Board of Education adopts their budget, we will create a new line going forward. Provide the detail on year-to-date professional development, line 418. At the beginning of the year, we did spend a significant amount out of what was budgeted, $2,950 for PD for all K-12 PE teachers. That was a one-time expense. We do not see that reoccurring as we move forward. The ice machine was budgeted in a supply line, and we are going to move that to the equipment line. And that'll be in the cut and add spreadsheet that you will be going forward with in the next couple of days. There was a request that the athletic director share the number of coaches per team in our DERG, and there is an attachment, a D, to your package that breaks down all of our DERG coaches and how many, our DERG communities and how many coaches are in each particular sport. And there was a question regarding which schools or which sports use School Cash Online. As you do recall, at the beginning of the year, we did roll out School Cash Online. We are looking to have all of our winter banquets utilizing School Cash Online, and all of our spring sports are expected to utilize this software as well. We can entertain any questions.
Board comments or questions? Mr. Maroney.
I don't know if anyone will have the answer to this, but we do professional development for our coaches. And is that line in here, and the volunteers as well? Or is it just the money was just spent on PE teachers?
We do professional development for coaches. We support them. They're required to take number of CEUs to maintain their coaching license and CPR training, and that would all be charged to that same line.
Any other board questions? Mrs. McNamara.
On Exhibit D for paid coaches, I don't recall, but was there a reason why these sports were focused on and not the others that are in the original spreadsheet we received Saturday?
I don't.
Okay.
I don't know.
Can I follow up on D as well? It is interesting, but without knowing the number of persons on their teams,
Okay.
I'm not sure it's illustrative.
The other question I would have is, do all these teams make cuts? Do some of them make cuts? Which teams make cuts? So if you look at boys lacrosse, is Buchanan running their boys lacrosse program with 3 coaches for freshmen, JV, and varsity? And that's all they
Well, I
have
think
is
that
3
goes to the number of students, and we might not know whether they cut or not, but we certainly could figure out
They
how
clearly
many
have
kids.
Smaller teams. So.
Yeah.
So,
So it's the number of, If you can't find it out, it's fine, but I'm not sure what this tells us without that.
And for the other sports that are omitted, or at least an explanation as to why those other sports were omitted, maybe a good reason, but I can't quite see it here.
Mrs. McCammon?
I think this is great analysis. Are we planning to do anything with this budgetarily, or is this more of a programmatic discussion about how our athletic program is structured? It's something we might look at.
I mean, personally, I think it goes back to the question of, are we applying any formula, or what is the philosophy of how many coaches per sport, per team, per participant? And it's something I know, and maybe you're right, it's not within this context, but I think it's something we should figure out.
I think it could be within this context if we decided to make modifications to it. They're FTEs. I mean, well, they're I should say they're employees.
Agreed. I'm just curious if that's what we're trying to do, or if we're looking for.
My guess is it could be both. I don't think we know if it's both until we know what the philosophy is on something like this. Because if we're adding staff, or we want to subtract, where. Mrs. McNamara.
Sorry, sort of picking up on that same point, is there a way in which to determine of the paid coaches, which are stipend and which are non-employee, they're all employees, but you know what I'm saying, which have other roles in the district versus just the sailing coach, for example?
I'm not sure.
I don't know if that's.
So I guess I would ask Jill's follow-up question on that. Budgetarily, how would that matter? It's either, it's the dollar amount associated that I'm really looking at the moment.
Okay, we can start with the numbers. I guess we find out all the numbers, but is this person have a different role also in the school district?
Can I just say that our experiences over the past several years is that we have to go outside the district in order to get coaches, because a lot of teachers who used to coach have elected over the years not to do so. I think you see this in every district. And more districts are seeking outside the district to find coaches because they can't find them inside.
But I'm correct, if we're paying a coach, we're paying a coach. So whether they also are a teacher as well doesn't affect
Correct.
their salary as a coach.
Okay, maybe that's a better question. Is there a difference between a stipend, whether or not this person is employed by the district independently?
No.
And I realize there are also this might be helpful, the stipend schedule. We have seen that in the past of the sports. Is it possible to get that?
Yeah.
'Cause I know we've seen that.
Yeah, that's in the contract. It's online up on the website right now. But I mean, we could get it, but it's in the contract. It's the appendix.
Oh, okay. Or if we can just get that, but I think that would help put some of these sports in context. And we could just match the stipend to the sport.
RC1, they're in high school.
Oh, I'm sorry, still on the sports.
sorry.
It's a separate topic now. I'd asked about the fee for the Greenwich and the New Canaan Y swim dive team. And just to clarify, I believe when I asked Mr. Manfredonia, are we currently paying that fee? He replied yes. In last year's budget, that was a cut. But, okay, I just want to.
Sorry, Deb, you gotta say it out loud.
Okay.
Sorry, last year they cut the boys' Sunday practices, so they no longer needed the weekend practice. That was eliminated.
Okay, all I know is we cut money that was allocated for the Greenwich Y. I don't know
Yeah,
for
that
whom.
was for swimming, that wasn't for diving. It's
Okay, that's independent of what we're seeing in this budget. That's what I just want to clarify. Okay, so we're not using that Greenwich Y this year?
Sorry, you guys, you gotta talk in the microphone.
I mean, Chris should be talking about this. The boys are not using the Greenwich Y. The girls did.
Okay.
And do.
Is anybody using the Greenwich Y?
Yes.
So that's the
And it's not the Greenwich Y,
Not
it's
the
the
Greenwich
Greenwich
Y.
Boys and Girls
Deb
Club.
is right on that question. That's a question the administration can follow up on. Is anyone using the Greenwich Y? It shouldn't be anecdotal.
It's the Greenwich Boys and Girls Club.
Okay, and how does that relate to the cut that went through for this current budget?
The one thing I would recommend is to look at the litigation that happened on Title IX many years ago regarding this, because I think this is something to do, the girls swim club at Greenwich Boys and Girls Club has something to do with the Title IX legislation. It happened a dozen years ago.
So I think we looked at this last year. We can revisit it. The question on the table is, are we paying for it? I think we worked out Title IX, who's paying, who's not paying last year. We can review the notes on that. The question that sits on the table at the moment is, are we utilizing it and how much money is expended in this budget? Because we're on this budget.
So there's two questions. What is the allocated money for the two off-site locations for the Darien Swim and Dive Team?
Any other questions on RC 11? Okay, we'll move forward to RC 1, Darien High School.
Okay, there was a question regarding a 6% increase for the science teachers, and what I wanted to do here is just to illustrate that when you look at the salary lines, there are a lot of variables that actually occur. So this will show in 18-19 it was a step forward, that entire step. For example, if you take someone that's currently on a step MA, a grade MA, step 5, and for 19-20 they move to MA, step MA to grade 6. It totals approximately a 4.37% increase, while there are others that are in the spreadsheet that are significantly less, and some are more. So that's why when you look at an individual salary line, the percentage increases across the board are a little different. It ties into the union contract as to what the step and grade is.
So I think that's a good point. It's come up a couple times. The teaching contract is online. It's a great thing as a board member to be familiar with. It helps with the appendices, who's paid what, and the steps to anticipate as you go through the budget financially. So if we don't have the link, I'll send it to you, but it is up online.
The second question at DHS, there was a question as what events require police and fire services at DHS, and I had presented you a flavor of some of those events at the high school that require police and fire services.
So Mike, is Turkey Bowl in there? Because if we host it down in Stamford, we have some of the cost associated with it?
Yes, that's my answer.
Okay, any questions on this RC on the high school?
So just on the
Mrs. Ritchie?
Turkey Bowl, it's only if we're the host or we're paying either way?
So it's my understanding, we get the revenue every other year. It's my understanding, and I'll follow up on the 15th just to make sure that it basically wrote, so it would be the sole responsibility of the host, and then the following year it would be.
So when you're taking in the revenue, you cover the costs?
So I think my understanding of the agreement is you treat it like a home game in your home, although that'll have to be renegotiated soon enough.
Yeah.
Any other questions on RC1? RC15, technology.
So as we prepare the cut and add session will determine whether or not we move world language from RC19 to RC15 or vice versa.
And when we get there, you'll have a recommendation.
Yes.
Okay. Any questions on RC15? Okay. Moving on to RC12 and RC25, fixed expenses, maintenance and fixed expenses.
There was a question on the cost-benefit analysis of contracted services, and if we could look past the past 5 years as to what those percentage increases are, that is broken down here, going back to 2015-16 and looking forward to 2021 because we are looking at a 2-year contract that we're entering into. And then also, as Mike Lynch had reported, that there is a savings of $350,000, so we broke that down as to what the annual custodian salary is, including benefits, the cost of moving 6 employees in-house, as well as some of the uniform and supplies that would be accounted for as well. And when you offset the cost of the contract of the $228,000 in 19-20, the increase would be for the Board of Education $350,000 and change. The next question was the number of buses utilized by the district. We currently operate 24 Type 1 passenger vans, which have a capacity of 70 to 72. We have 2 wheelchair buses and 5 Type 2 buses. Update the narrative on page 93 regarding regular transportation. There was an error on that description. It is at the revised page is attached as attachment E. We also had provided a new sheet on descriptions of capital items in the budget, which is a series of pages as attachment F, and it's something that the board typically does get. And the final item is a new page with the new total for Holmes Elementary that includes an additional $100,000 for the asbestos abatement, and that is attached as attachment G.
So do you want to handle capital projects inside of this, as we ask questions? Because Schedule F is capital. Do you want to handle it all together? All right. So question on maintenance, fixed costs, and/or capital. Seeing none, Mr. Lynch, I have a question. Can you talk to me about the unit ventilators at Holmes? And my question is, in your professional experience, do you believe this is a priority 1 or priority 2? And do we, I read this description quickly as I sat here. Do you believe that those classrooms have adequate fresh air, or do you believe that this is something that needs to be done in this budget cycle?
My opinion is that it does not need to be done. We embarked about 5 years ago on getting all the windows in the district working. We used to do a certain number per year, so they were all done. It's something that does need to be done more so than, say, Royal, because a place without ventilation in Royal, you have doors going to the playground, you have doors going to the playing field, you have doors going out to the music portables. So there is a lot of really forced ventilation because the doors are being opened and closed, and you got 500 kids going in and out 3 doors, literally all day long. Half of these ventilators are up on the 2nd floor of Holmes. So it's a little more needed than, say, at Royal or Henley. But, you know, when I was making the budget up, I was trying to keep the numbers kind of so they don't big spikes year to year. So I felt that was an item that could be put out another year. If the board was looking to even things out, I would suggest you put in money to hire a professional to come up with a set of design specs and a probable cost, because this type of work is very invasive. You have to go into each room and do the removals and the abatement and the repair of the wall, and then you would do a rooftop mounted unit and duct work, so there'd be a tremendous amount of work that would be done. It's not just taking something out and putting something in and plugging it in. It's a lot of work. I did it at another school years ago, similar aged, and it's very complicated.
So it sounds like it sounds like there's no denying that it needs to be done, but if you had your budget again, is this the first thing that you would have moved to priority 1 or from priority 2 to priority 1? Or are there other things that were priority 2 that you see even more pressing?
No, if I'd been asked, I would have said, give me the money to do the design of Holmes and Royal and Hindley, and then I would have a firm number next year to come back. None of them are dire, we got to do it today type of things, but.
And how much would design be? How much would a design budget
For the 3 buildings, to have someone look at the 3 buildings, Holmes, Hindley, and Royal, I would think a project of that magnitude, you'd be looking at about $60,000 to $80,000 for a complete, you know, a complete schematic design, cost projection, you know, probable cost projection, and something you're ready to go out to bid with. And then, you know, my order of need would be Holmes, Royal, Hindley.
Are there any, Mr. Denny?
So, but then you would do those over 3 consecutive years based on that priority?
Yeah, very invasive.
Right.
You couldn't, you couldn't have any summer programs or use of the buildings at all, and you'd probably have a hard time getting it all done in one summer, you know.
Mrs. McNamara, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, so to clarify, the numbers that we've been presented in the capital budget do not include the design?
No, they don't. Those numbers are numbers, well, it is included in, yes.
I'm sorry, now I'm confused.
No, it is included
Okay.
in those numbers.
In that 451?
Yes, those numbers are from the building condition survey.
Okay, right.
And if, you remember the big books we
Yep.
got? All right, if you open it up and you follow that number across from left to right, you'll see there's a design cost built in there.
Okay.
So,
that
and
is
in
the
fact, there's even an
451.
escalator cost
Okay.
clause in there too, so.
Okay.
Those numbers are there, yes.
Okay, thank you.
I think the question I have is, if we're upgrading our wiring and we put air conditioning in, do we need to redo a ventilator?
Yes, the air conditioning units, when they're on and cooling, if you have the unit switched a certain way, you will be introducing outside air, otherwise you won't be. In the 1996 building, there are unit ventilators that will be bringing in fresh air all year round. Those units are inoperable at homes, and at Royal, they don't exist in the 1958 edition.
Sorry, you lost me with that answer. So
You will not get fresh air just by doing this air conditioning project.
Okay.
You're not increasing any fresh air
Okay.
going into those classrooms.
Mr. Brown? Oh. There's no action on these items tonight, but I may signal to my fellow board members that some of us may put in money for design.
But the design is there, you just said.
Well, the design and the construction dollars are there. You might want to break it out and do
No.
design now.
What you have in the budget is $451,000. What I hear Mr. Lynch saying, so just for consideration, is that what he really needs in order to do this project is $60,000 to $80,000 in this year's budget.
Okay, I'm sorry.
And that is for design, and the project would be done in subsequent years. So, food for thought. Any other maintenance, capital, or fixed cost questions? Thank you.
Okay. Good night.
RC 16, administration.
There was a request to break out RC 16 legal fees that is under the administration account. Year to date, we have spent $135,000. Of that amount, 31% can be attributed to one file. And when we look into 17-18, we spent $79,000 for that same one, and in 16-17, we spent $62,000 for that same file as well. The next question, which we'll provide on the following meeting of January 15th, an update to the FOI log.
Mr. Maroney.
So I'll ask my question in the appropriate place now. So is the other 69% on other FOIAs, or is that other negotiations for the attorneys?
There's no negotiation, there were no negotiations.
No negotiations?
Yeah, correct. So
Sorry, personnel matters.
various personnel matters.
Okay.
Well, really, I was gonna say our legal fees are in here, so it doesn't necessarily have to be personnel, it's any other legal fee that is not special ed or associated with FOIA. I'm just doing quick math here, sorry. Any other questions? Okay, RC 18, personnel.
There was a question under budget control, line 668, what was expended and what was budgeted going back to 2015-16, and that chart is there for your information.
Okay, are there any questions going into January 15th that the board has? Or we'll just continue the discussion then? All right, thank you for all this work and the quick turnaround. We appreciate it. That must have been a lot of weekend work getting that ready. We will move on to the proposed memorandum of understanding between the Darien Board of Education and the Darien Police Department. Mr. Feeney.
Enclosed for your consideration and approval is a memorandum of understanding with the police department for access to our security cameras in events of emergencies. As you're well aware, we have invested a significant amount of money upgrading our security system, and there is capability now where the police department can access our feeds during any type of an emergency situation. So we have drafted this memorandum of understanding with the review of our legal counsel as well. It is in the hands of the police department to also review and to approve, but we are seeking your approval for this memorandum of understanding.
Mrs. McCammon?
Can you just confirm for us the process you went through to get to this point? I'm just confirming that lawyers were consulted, et cetera. I just want to understand. I'm sure that they were, but what due diligence did we do on our side of the table?
Okay. So we did a lot. We met, and actually it's a very exciting piece, really. So we have worked a lot on upgrading all of our technology. The police department, in particular at the high school, has been very involved in our upgrading of the technology and the utilization. And now the possibility now is for them to actually tap into that technology in the event of emergency. So we have had meetings with the police department. They're excited. We're excited about this capability as well. We're required to have a memorandum of understanding, and this is kind of a best practice, one could actually say, that we had developed in conjunction with our attorneys.
Okay. Sorry, further more questions, Mr. Burke?
So if I understand this correctly, so at the only junctures at which the police department can tap into that system is when some sort of emergency notice has been given to them, or at the administration's specific request that they do so.
Yes. Okay. So what we don't want happening is for someone to basically log into our system, take control of our feed, or use it for any type of alternative type of investigation without our knowledge and our consent.
Mrs. Ritchie?
Are they able to tap in anytime they want? I mean, let's just say someone wants to tap in for a nefarious reason. Will they have that capability to go in anytime?
They would have the capability, but we'd also have logs as to when it was accessed. We'd immediately know.
Not that I expect them to do that, I was just curious.
Let's hope the police department isn't nefarious.
So we're not permitting them to record the live feeds, but they're actually able to see the live feed?
Correct.
Okay, but we're recording everything, so if they needed to access a file or something, they could?
It would be backed up in our servers.
Okay.
So this is without objection. I'm not really, you don't have action on this, so unless there's board objection, you are authorized. This is a MOU. So it doesn't require a board vote unless there's objection to the memo. Okay, all right. Thank you. We will move forward with the presentation discussion of the board master agenda for February through August 2019. Dr. Landon.
We've tried to bring this up to date from February through to the end of next summer. There were some things that we had on the budget that we had planned to do earlier, but because of other competing issues, we've put them off. So, for example, on February 26th, we're going to be doing mathematics and science, which we had hoped to do earlier. This is pretty much based on what we have done in the past, based on our historical record, and also what we see as necessary to be done to enable the board to function smoothly through till the beginning of September.
Any board questions? Just Mrs. Ritchie.
Would our summer, let's call it our summer meeting, our
retreat.
I hate that word because we're not going anywhere. It makes you think we get to go somewhere fun.
We used to at least get out of this building.
We did. We used to go somewhere. Yeah. Well, no, we don't. We're retreating to here. That doesn't show up on this?
No,
particular-
generally because that is my own personal scheduling nightmare with you all, and you're my schedule somewhere in yours. So that's not on the master agenda because it doesn't have a standing date. These are all at regular Board of Education meetings.
So that's a date to be determined.
Yes. Mrs. McNamara.
Some just general questions. On June 11th, follow-up of internships. Just to clarify the.
That's the senior internship?
I'm assuming it is.
It says follow-up report on senior internship.
On senior internship. So,
On senior internship project.
yeah, when was the initial report? Could you just help me?
I guess it's because we're following up on it.
Well,
It's
but
not
we
a
don't
follow-up
usually use that
item.
term. That's why it sounded like a second reading or something.
Let's just say report.
Yes, I'm not sure where Nadine got the language, but we'll
Okay,
have her
no,
change it.
that's just so to clarify that.
Mrs. Stein, do you have a question?
I just had a question on the district chair people. When they came, we did have some discussion about them coming back at some point because they had just started their positions. I would love to see an update at the end of the school year, just for them to come in and check in with us again and talk about how things are going now that they're in year 2.
Sure, we can certainly do that with them collectively. You'll be seeing them independent of one
individually.
another through their curriculum updates, but most
Yeah.
certainly we can do that.
That'd be great, thank you.
I do feel like when they came in,
We had sort
we
of
can,
said-
kind of a regular update
Sure.
since they were aligning. Mrs. McCammon.
But when they come in, could they give a fairly pointed, tight update as opposed to something more conversational? I would, it's nice to hear their experiences, but I think I'd be looking to understand programmatically some fairly tight information about change they're making, things they're excited
Yeah,
about.
things, I mean,
opportunities for the future.
We had talked about going to the standard exams, and there were certain things we had touched on that we wanted to hear how it actually is rolling out and how it's
If you may remember that last spring, they identified goals for this year. They identified their priorities, so they can circle back and respond to where those priorities were in our.
But if the board has any questions that you would like the department chairs to address when they come forward, please forward them to us so that we can plan accordingly.
Just expanding on that, just if they can give us some sort of, I don't know if there's a metric or a way that they're measuring things to say, okay, this has been a success, and these are the reasons why. Give more evidence based. We're
So
putting
what
it
if
into
there are
action.
district chair questions, if you all send them in, and that'll help inform the agenda, and we can certainly, to Dr. Lynn's point, help the administration know what we're looking to see on there. I think that'd be a good idea, because there's 4 members at least who feel they'd like an update. 5, actually. All right, Mr. Maroney.
Yeah, do we ever discuss, I mentioned it at the Saturday meeting, do we ever discuss busing and things like that on here, or no?
So this is a master agenda, kind of what, it doesn't mean that busing or transportation can't come up on an agenda. These are kind of the yearly regular updates that we see.
But I'm wondering if we should have a yearly update of something in the late spring for telling people what their buses are going to be in the fall. Because it seems like every year there's a.
Is that possible?
Or maybe it's the last in August, but I think there seems to be problems at that point in the year that maybe we should have an update and alert people of what these changes, if any, may be.
I don't think we can really come up with actual modifications until we're into the summer and we do our trial runs and look at our enrollments and the placements of kids and put it together. But I know we do spend a good deal of time in the summer preparing routes and trying to provide equity and balance wherever we can.
I do think, to your point too, it may depend what the selectmen try to do with their budgets and what this sidewalk thing is or isn't. So, we can maybe look for an update, but I think part of it is enrollment. We don't have addresses of students until that key point.
I think to maybe, Dennis, to your point, part of it was I think we had a lot of feedback on some changes we made, and I think you agreed that there was some timing issues with when communication went out and when people were here in August, which generally a lot of people are not. So I think, to your point, maybe just make sure there's more of a robust communication plan around it and a repetitive communication program. It also goes out in the newspaper, I know.
Why don't we do this though? See, part of, I think, what we all experienced last year is there were significant shifts due to new sidewalks. I think as this conversation evolves now with the selectmen, we can do our best to update the whole board, and the selectmen and see where we are. Are there any changes for next year? Are there not? And that itself may be an agenda item that gets at some of what you're looking, but, until I know quite what they're doing, I'm not sure how to update you, and I know from us, they'd like some maps, so it's not, let's not put it on here, but it won't be forgotten.
Fair enough.
How about that?
Yep.
Mrs. McNamara.
This again is just the verbiage, looking at June 25th and July 23rd. The annual progress report on the 1920 goals, and then we have the first reading of the goals.
Well,
What are we thinking there?
I think you might want to discuss possible goals on the 25th, but remember, you're going to have a new superintendent effective July 1st, and I think you should really engage the new superintendent in the definition of goals for the upcoming school year.
I think it's typo.
Thank you.
I think Nadine has typo. I think we get an update on the 1920 goals, and then the first reading and discussion is actually supposed to be the 2021.
Right, we can't have a first reading as we've ended
I
the
think
school
it's just
year.
enough. I think Nadine just forgot to change the year going forward.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
all right, sorry.
That's what confused me.
Dennis?
Yeah, another one for me is, I'd love to be able to have special ed come back, and I don't know when, but sometime, I think, I have a problem when it's in December. It feels like it's just a report, and there's nothing we can do to do anything with that report. And I'd love to have it be more of a discussion on helping us set our goals and objectives, but in December, it's way too late. So we've already, to me, I think, I would like to have that earlier in the spring to help frame those discussions of our goals and objectives. Or maybe it's a biannual report meeting as opposed to just once in December.
Do you have any thoughts on that, Mrs. Klein?
Well, I believe we set our goals, actually in July is when we begin setting our goal setting. I think the first time we report out, I don't have the document in front of us, but we have a fall report to the board, we have our winter report, and then our spring report. So I think that's how we do present our goals in those timelines, in terms of how they're divided.
I think we have an update on the goals and the objectives every season, for lack of a better way. And then there's a special ed report at the end of the year. You're looking for something different.
I'm not sure. I'm just tossing something out to see if others agree or not. But
Mrs. McCammon.
you might like mine.
Sorry. It seems like that was a little tag team. It seems like directly at each other.
I'm going to agree with Dennis, and then I think that perhaps what I'd like to see us do this year is maybe talk about the purpose of that special education report, what information the board really needs. It is a tremendous amount of work that goes into it. But I think we could refine a little bit what information really the board needs to hear and how that would inform our planning. So it might be that for this year we can't necessarily set what the right date is, but I think, you know, when it comes in December, some of it's kind of circling back on what's been done, some of it's thinking about the future, and it sort of comes at a funny point in time in that we can't really inform this year's budget. It's a bit of a teaser. So I think that there might be another time, you know, when issues come up, December isn't really a time for us to respond to it because we're in the middle of budget season. So either we think about it more preemptively in terms of thinking of it as future planning, in which case I would agree that the spring probably is a good time, or it has a slightly different purpose. But
So my only thoughts on that is I think if you're going to apply that to special education, you'd have to apply it to every program, because you could argue the same thing, right? That if you're talking about planning of goals, I'm not sure why we would single out one department if there's a concern that we need to do things biannually. That seems reasonable to me. And I'm looking for anyone else's thoughts. I don't have a friend to phone on this. This is new to me. But I don't know that singling out special ed, I don't know why. I don't know why special ed versus saying, well, then let's do that with general ed, let's do that with curriculum, IDA, and special ed. That doesn't mean I'm speaking against it, I'm just saying we would need to plan duly for all. Mr. Burke?
I feel very well informed in the reporting that we're getting now, and I don't have an issue with the timing. I also see that, special education and what goes on in a year, I mean, it's sort of a moving target where things, I think, are changing seasonally as kids are going through and having their IEPs and getting through their year. I think if there's a particular area that any of us think within the special education reporting that we could be more informed on, if there's a topic, that might be something to communicate through you to the folks who are doing the reporting. That I don't see the benefit of additional reporting on that or changing the timing. But certainly, if there's something that the feeling is that can be better informed upon, then that's something different and specific.
Mrs. McNamara?
Not that I can, it's on the same topic, obviously. Not that I can identify anything specific, but I think it would be helpful, at least for me, if this presentation came again in the spring, June, before you talk about your district goals. I feel it would help put your goals in context to a presentation in the spring. So therefore, I could evaluate your district goals better if I heard the presentation biannually.
So,
Personally.
Krista, can you speak to my concern? And it's not really a concern other than I think we'd have to make room in the agenda for lots of things. Why one program versus another program?
I don't think that's the right breakdown. I think it's just a matter of the best time of the year to hear about special education. I think
But
that's fair. Right.
I don't disagree with the conversation, and I think, like seeing some of the data that we got for the budget season, I think we should decide as a board, this is some data we want to see in that report, now that we've decided to publish some of this information. But I'd flip it the other way, and I hear what you're all saying, but I'd go to the professional, Shirley and Dr. Landon, and is there a better time to discuss special ed in the cycle of the year than what we're doing now? I think we sometimes we want what we want to look at stuff and understand stuff better, but I think sometimes we get caught up in what we want versus understanding from the professional that's running the program and managing it. I'd rather hear from you, is there a better time to present the data?
So why don't we mull that over and come back to the board with a recommendation?
Yep. I think it's a great conversation. I think we get each year more and more clarity around it. Part of it is, informing everyone in town, and this data is phenomenal. But that's kind of what I'd like to hear from the administration.
Mrs. McNamara?
Different topic. Independently of then special education, I don't know whether we're going to vote on that, to add it as an agenda item, or do we all sort of agree not to? Or
Well, I think, we've had a couple different suggestions thrown on the table. Typically, it seems like there's dissension on when to do it. My recommendation to the board then would to let the administration come back with a recommendation, but if someone would like to make a motion, they're welcome to.
I'm fine to wait to that, but I just wanted to clarify where we stood with it. I would like to add to the agenda a little bit more in-depth conversation regarding our athletics. I feel we got into a lot of issues during budget discussion, which may or may not have been related to the dollars that we're allocating, but I think a more holistic approach to how we look at athletics, how we staff athletics, how we supply equipment to athletics, would be worthwhile to have that conversation again, perhaps at the end of the year.
Yeah, that would be fine, and I hate to be repetitive, but please, if board members, if that's an issue, I think all the board members who are interested should send us the questions so that we can really do a thorough analysis. It's
Absolutely.
I don't mind answering any of these questions, but sometimes, when they just come up, like in a budget discussion, it's very hard for us to give fully comprehensive answers and meaningful answers.
Very fair. No, absolutely. I think that's a very fair comment.
Because we'd be very happy to come back with a full analysis of the athletic program. Just tell us.
Well, let's hold. Not that I don't want a full analysis of the athletic program, but Mr. Burkhalter and I know we did 4 hours on this last year. So similarly, I would say with the department chairs, I saw five nods going on. Here I saw special ed. We saw different. Is there an appetite of the board to hold another meeting on athletics? And it's Mr. Burke.
I'm resistant to it. I feel it's something that we spent time on last summer. I think that there are many topics. I mean, this is kind of, as we would say, a hot bench. There are a lot of questions that are always coming, from us. And I would say, with regard to athletics, absent some demonstrable problem or crisis in it, I don't know that it's an effective use of our board time this summer or the next several months, having done it last year.
Mrs. McCannon.
I felt during the budget day that there were quite a few conversations that really were more programmatic than they were budgetary. They may touch on budgetary implications ultimately, but I think I heard conversations about equipment, about uniforms, about staffing ratios, and about some of the costing. And that's the kind of conversation I think we can have effectively, tightly, outside of the budget season, so that we don't get caught during budget season off topic.
Okay, Mr. Deneen.
Yeah, again, I agree with all the conversation. I would ask that we think of, we spent a lot of time on it last year, and I really rely on the audience, and I rely on the hundreds of people I talk to throughout town about various things. And I think what we have to think about it as a board is there's no one here beating down our door or making long speeches or asking a million questions about the sports programs. There are very specific examples, to Jill's point, about equipment and equipment replacement and uniforms and stuff like that. But with all due respect, Krista, my challenge is I don't understand where you're trying to get to with this. So if we can get to clarity on that, it's great. But in terms of our time and what we need to spend time on, I really value what comes out of the public, what and who I talk to throughout town, and there's other things that people press me on that we should be paying attention to. So that's kind of my view on it.
So
I guess I find it distance.
Why don't I offer this as a compromise to what I'm hearing and see if this is a sense of the board is satisfied for this. Last year we did a retreat and it was a full 4.5 hours. Maybe this year, if there are particularly pointed questions, we can add it to an agenda item, realizing that it will be in at a regular board meeting, and it would need to be a very tight conversation. We're not looking to have another 4.5 hour conversation on this. So in that sense, if board members have questions, just like I asked last year, please send them to me, and I will make sure that it appears on this season of agendas. I'm not entirely sure where yet, but I will get it on here before the summer. But it will be a presentation, much like we hear a presentation from special
That's
ed.
exactly what I guess. I don't want to be hearing about field hockey equipment being taped during a budget meeting. To me, this can be just a presentation like we hear from other department chairs or other areas.
Okay, so we will agree on that. Yep. Any other additions to the master agenda? As I go down here, wait 1 second, Krista. Right now I have department chairs. I have athletics as a presentation. Mrs. McNamara.
In light of our recent conversation, would it behoove us to have an update on FOIA, just to schedule it another time in the course of the next couple of months? To just get it on the schedule. We've talked about trying to get it on a regular basis.
More about what you're looking for. I'm sorry.
What is the update to the FOIA log? Where does that stand?
Yeah. It's coming next.
There's a date.
No, but that we're going to see it again maybe in July. That we're sort of getting a periodicity that we're seeing it twice a year, just so it's on our radar.
Is anyone interested in a quarterly update to FOIA?
It'd be biannual.
biannual update to FOIA
Yeah,
report.
we talked about once or twice a year when we give.
No, that, I'm just making sure. I'm fine. If I see enough nods, I don't have to take a motion and a vote. Do a biannual update on FOIA.
It would be, I would think, hopefully a 5-minute conversation, but just so we know.
Anything else? Okay. Oh, Mrs. McNamara.
On June 25th, we're talking about revised facilities use fee, which is great. I wanted to see if there was any appetite of the board to also, in that context, to talk about fees, broadening that topic of fees and advertising on scoreboards.
Would
That's
that
a-
be policy?
That's a policy. We have a policy against it. So
We
it's a
no,
policy
well, we have a
discussion.
policy against alcohol, tobacco, which I don't think there's any debate about. I did not see any policy that there's no advertising.
The
I'll
policy
look
committee
into
can
that.
do some research on that.
Yeah, I did. I mean,
But-
we certainly have a policy against tobacco, alcohol, and illicit drugs.
Advertising.
We don't have a policy on advertising.
I believe we're gonna let that at the policy committee level.
So we're gonna start in
and should-
policy and then,
Well, policy needs to decide what they're taking up, unless anyone has a pressing need to bring that to the board level without policy seeing it.
we can
Seeing
start with
none,
policy.
Policy committee, that's why we have you.
Okay, great, thank you.
Anything else? Okay. We will move on. To action items, personnel items, Mrs. Sion.
So we hired a special education department chair for Middlesex and had 3 resignations and retirements.
So may I have a motion to approve the PAR dated January 8th, 2019? Mrs. Ritchie, so moves. Mr. Deneen seconds. All in favor? That is unanimous. Public comment.
Teresa Vogt, 22 Circle Road, and I'm also on the RTM Education Committee. With regard to athletics, you absolutely need to have another meeting. I watched your deep dive. Those are 3 hours of my life I want back. You guys spent more time picking apart the clubs at the high school than you did athletics. All the questions I heard you guys ask on Saturday were questions that you either did not ask in June or that you somehow chose to, you either made an excuse for it, like staffing, coaching, all of these programmatic and budgetary questions. You didn't even touch them in June. And so we're having these conversations every January in the budget meeting, and they should have been settled in June. You guys absolutely need to do another deep dive.
Taylor Carter, 385 Middlesex Road. Also a member of the Finance and Budget Committee, but here as a parent. Although, similarly to my comments over the weekend, I would really love to see you guys add security to the agenda in a major way. Have a forward-thinking, comprehensive plan that's laid out with multi-stages, kind of like we treat technology. It would make me feel better as a parent having 4 kids in the same building, and I'd appreciate it.
Stacy TA, 10 Clocks Lane. I just also wanted to add maybe an update on the technology one-to-one rollout, how it's working with the iPads at the high school, how it's working with the Chromebooks at the middle school and the elementary school. If you want to make any changes to that, you guys haven't looked at that in a while.
Carolina Magoy, 28 Kensett. I'm part of the RTM. MCGOEY. Also part of the Education Committee, the RTM. I second what Teresa said. I think we had several questions in our last budget, and that was the first time that I participated with education as an RTM member in regards to athletics. And I think there's still a ton of other things that will come up in our upcoming discussions next week about the budget, et cetera, et cetera. So I second as important meeting. So I think it's important. Thank you.
Can you say your address again?
28 Kensett.
Thank you. Any other public comment? May I have a motion to adjourn? Mrs. McCammon, second. Mr. Burke, all in favor? That is unanimous. Krista, you gotta raise your hand.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Yes, absolutely. No, I want to stay.
My feet are too cold for you to stay.